Marizella here, and welcome to the first in my series of videos named The Earth is Flat, Rory Cooper Says So. Now in this series I intend to look at the claims made by Rory Cooper and debunking them, but also claims made by other flat earthers such as Jelinkalogia, Can et al., Iovandrake, and Immortal Souls, and of course Matthew Boylan. We intend to demonstrate, using simple geometry and physics, that both their claims are patently false, and that we can easily figure out that the Earth is indeed round.
Now in this first video, we're going to have a look at Rory's take on what is probably one of the greatest proofs possible for anybody unable to leave the surface of the Earth that the Earth is a spheroid. We'll call this the pole stars conundrum. Anybody able to use the photosensitive ganglion cells in their retinas, together with all the other highly evolved parts of their optic system enabling them to see, can look up in the night sky and notice that the stars they can see appear to revolve around a central point. In the northern hemisphere, you will notice that the closest star to this central point is Polaris. In the southern hemisphere, you will notice that the closest star is Sigma Octantis. For purposes of clarification here, when I talk about the northern hemisphere, that equates to anybody on a flat Earth living inside the red circle. When I talk about the southern hemisphere, that equates to anybody on a flat Earth living inside the blue circle. You really have to spell everything out for flat earthers. When it was pointed out to Rory that the Earth actually has two pole stars, he was forced to make the monumental gaffe and childish conjecture that these are actually the same star, meaning that in his world the Earth only has one pole star, which would certainly seem to confirm a flat Earth. However, as usual, Rory runs into a few problems with his asinine approach to astronomy. The first problems, as pointed out by Jim Smith in Chiapas in his video No Flat Earthers Polaris Isn't Sigma Octantis, are quite simple. Firstly, Polaris and Sigma Octantis have different apparent magnitudes, which is to say that they aren't the same brightness. Polaris is bright and clear in the night sky at magnitude 2, whereas Sigma Octantis is significantly fainter at magnitude 5.42. A quick note, the lower the magnitude, the brighter the star. Flat earthers can of course attempt to explain this away by stating that someone past the government conspiracy concocted line called the equator, that's someone in the southern hemisphere for those of us still in full control of our critical faculties, would be further away from the pole star, and that this would account for the difference in the observed brightness of the star. The problem with this conjecture is that the brightness of Sigma Octantis doesn't change for someone in Australia or someone near the equator. Neither does the apparent magnitude of Polaris change for someone in Scandinavia or someone in Kenya. To put it simply, everybody in the blue circle sees the pole star exactly as bright as everybody else in the blue circle, and everybody in the red circle sees the pole star exactly as bright as everybody else in the red circle. Instead, the pole star must then magically jump from magnitude 5.42 to magnitude 2 as soon as you move a few kilometers either side of the equator, and yet stay at this magnitude no matter how much further away from the equator you travel. Flat earthers can provide no physics to explain this phenomenon. The second problem for Rory's conjecture, as pointed out by Jim Smith in Chiapas' excellent video, is that the star field surrounding Polaris and Sigma Octantis are completely different. In other words, they are surrounded by different constellations. Again, flat earthers try to explain this away by arguing that when you move towards or away from the pole star, the sky would obviously change. Here they run into several problems though. To begin with, just as with the last point, the star fields don't change for someone in Australia or someone near the equator, or in the northern hemisphere someone in Scandinavia and someone in Kenya, but somehow the stars magically jump to new positions once you travel just a short way across the equator. So to clarify again, that means everybody in the blue circle sees the exact same constellations as everybody else in the blue circle, and everybody in the red circle sees the exact same constellations as everybody else in the red circle. Plus, those in the red circle can't see all the constellations that those in the blue circle can see, and those in the blue circle can't see all the constellations that those in the red circle can see. Another problem they find difficult to explain are the different distances and directions each star must move in order for us to see them in their new constellations. There is still another large problem though, which would be apparent to anyone who was standing near the equator. because they can see that stars to the south seem to rotate around one central point, while stars in the north appear to rotate around another central point. Not only that, but they can confirm that the constellations in the northern sky and those in the southern sky are not the same. They can see Ursa Major, which the Plough is part of, and the Southern Cross at the same time. Again, spelling it out for flat earthers, on their model, anyone stood at the points on the equator can see all the constellations visible to people in the red and blue circles, but people in the red and blue circles cannot see all the same constellations. Somehow. And why is this significant? Simply because Gay-Crux and Acrux, the pointer stars in the Southern Cross, point to Sigma Octantis, whereas Merope and Du, the pointer stars in the Plough, point to Polaris. If Polaris and Sigma Octantis were the same star, and the star fields around them consisted of the same stars, then it would be impossible to see the Plough and the Southern Cross, because these must be the same constellation viewed from a different perspective on a flat Earth. Now with those 2 points out of the way, we're going to focus on the largest problems with any attempts flat earthers fling around to explain the pole star's conundrum away, like distraught monkeys flinging their feces at a passing lion. These problems would be the directions the stars lie in, and their motions across the night sky. So to begin with, Polaris is visible when you look towards the north, in the northern hemisphere, and Sigma Octantis is visible when you look towards the south, in the southern hemisphere. Somehow, God only knows how, as you walk away from whatever pole star you can see as you cross the equator, the pole star must jump ahead of you. This is a remarkable celestial feat. The other problem naturally arises when you observe the motions of the 2 pole stars. Polaris can be seen moving counterclockwise around the night sky, whilst Sigma Octantis travels clockwise around its central point. This provides a massive problem to the flat Earth conjecture and a fucking massive clue about the shape of the Earth.
But first, let's go over to fake clouds in sky to see what he thinks about the apparent motion of stars in the sky. Well, of course, the first question is, what does he think is causing these streaks of light? That's motion blur, fake clouds in sky. Your picture isn't blur-free, it's motion blur causing those streaks in the sky. Now what's causing the motion blur? Well, I think it should be obvious by the word motion being in the name. This serves as a prime example of the intellectual capacity of your average flat earther. Well, now that that's sorted, on with the rest of the video.
Flat earthers of any denomination cannot account for the fact that anybody living inward from that government conspiracy concocted line called the equator would view Polaris moving in a counterclockwise direction, and yet anybody living outside that same line would not see Polaris but would see Sigma Octantis moving in the opposite direction. When pressed on this, flat earthers draw an amusing blank. The sky must, for Rory's conjecture about Polaris and Sigma Octantis being the same star to be true, magically flip over when one crosses the equator. The best, or rather the funniest and only attempt at an answer that I've ever been provided with by a flat earth proponent, came from someone going by the name of Canatal. It looked a bit like this. Now, the more astute among you will realise some important issues with this model. Firstly, we should be able to see a shearing motion in the sky, a line at which the stars can be seen to move in completely opposite directions. Oddly, nobody sees this or mentions it. More importantly though, the centre of the sky will still be moving in one direction. That means that the pole star is still going to be moving in the same direction, so we still wouldn't see Sigma Octantis and Polaris moving in different directions to each other. Now, I've got to be honest here. I have really tried to give Canatal's model every chance it had of explaining how the same star can be seen to move in 2 different directions across the night sky, depending on where you observed it on a flat Earth. The absolute very best that I can conceivably come up with is if this is how they believe the Earth itself revolves. That is to say, their model is only true if everything within that government conspiracy concocted line called the equator rotates one way, and everything without it rotates in the other direction. so that it looks like this. Now I don't know about you, but I'm frankly amazed how this hasn't been reported in the news. Surely it would not escape the notice of someone in southern Kenya, say, that part of their country disappeared every day to be replaced by seas and then parts of Asia, then more seas and then parts of South America, all zooming past at breakneck speed. And I'm not even touching here on the problems that this would have on trade and communication. But here's the crux of the pole stars conundrum. It's not that it is impossible for the stars in the sky to be seen to have two different points around which they involve if we live on a flat Earth. That's fine. No, the point is that, on a flat Earth of any kind, and yes, there are more than one kind of flat Earth model, it is impossible for one pole star to be visible to anyone living within a concentric circle of that Earth, whilst being invisible to anyone outside that concentric circle, and for everyone outside that concentric circle to be able to see a pole star that is invisible to everyone who lives within that concentric circle. People standing at points A and C here can only see a pole star that moves clockwise around the sky and cannot see a pole star that moves counterclockwise around the sky. People standing at point B can only see a pole star that moves counterclockwise around the sky and cannot see a pole star that moves clockwise around the sky. But the problem is that it is impossible for someone standing at point A to be able to see the same star as someone standing at point C without being able to see the same star as someone standing at point B. The only way that two pole stars can exist in a flat Earth model is if someone at one end of your flat Earth sees a completely different pole star to someone at the other end. In other words, every flat Earth model is only possible if the people at point A can only see one pole star moving in one direction and the people at point C can only see a different pole star moving in the completely opposite direction. And people at point B can see both stars. But people all over the southern hemisphere see the same pole star. And unless they're at the equator, they only see one pole star. Also in such a model, you'd see the stars going from south to north or north to south, rather than the east-west direction that we actually see them going in. So, in short, you can only have two pole stars that behave the way we observe them on an Earth that is not flat. And I mean not flat according to any denomination of flat Earth models.
So, naturally, the question you may be asking is, how does a spheroidal Earth account for the motions of the pole stars? To answer that, let's recap. 1. There is a different pole star for those north of the equator and south of the equator. 2. They move in opposite directions. And 3. This is impossible on a flat Earth. We can illustrate quite easily how these motions can be accounted for by a spheroidal Earth. In this simple illustration, the red block on the sphere represents somebody in the northern hemisphere, and the red block above the sphere represents Polaris. The blue block on the sphere represents somebody in the southern hemisphere, and the blue block below the sphere represents Sigma Octantis. Now let's rotate the sphere west to east, just like the Earth does, and see what happens. Now let's watch what happens from the perspective of the two people standing on the sphere. As you can see, Polaris, the red block, moves anti-clockwise, whereas Sigma Octantis, the blue block, moves clockwise. So, we can ascertain from all this that it is impossible for a flat Earth to account for the two pole stars as we observe them, and that the two pole stars are probably one of the best proofs possible for anybody unable to leave the surface of the Earth that they live on a spheroidal Earth. Join us next time when we explore what the geometrically illiterate flat earthers have to say about the horizon. That'll be fun.